When you hear the word plastic, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Probably pollution, right? Well, its story is way more complicated and honestly, a lot more surprising than you might think. It all started not with creating a problem, but with trying to solve one. Get this, before plastic was the villain, it was actually the hero. Yeah, you heard that right. It was originally created to replace things like ivory and tortoiseshell because, well, we were driving species to extinction to get them. An incredible, almost noble beginning for a material we see so differently today. So, how did we get from saving elephants to, well, where we are now? It's a story that kicks off with a couple of brilliant, world-changing inventions. And things moved fast. I mean, really fast. First, in 1862, we get Parkesine, which was made from plants. But by 1907, boom, we have Bakelite, the first plastic made entirely from scratch in a lab. And after that, the floodgates just burst open, and a whole wave of new plastics hit mass production. And why did it explode in popularity? Well, it's because plastic was, and, still is, kind of a miracle. Think about it. It's cheap, it's super strong, but also light, and you can mold it into pretty much anything you can dream up. That combination made it absolutely irresistible. It completely changed manufacturing, from medicine to cars to, well, everything. And that transformation happened on a scale that is just, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. So let's just dive into the numbers for a second. Okay, so between 1950 and 2017, we produced 9.2 billion tons of plastic. That is literally more than a ton for every single person alive on the planet right now. Just let that sink in. An absolutely unbelievable amount of stuff created in just a few decades. But here is the craziest part. The real story here is the speed. This isn't some problem that's been slowly building for 100 years. No, more than half of all the plastic that has ever existed was made in just the last 20 years or so. Since 2004, we've made more plastic recently than in all of history before it combined. And we are not hitting the brakes. We're now cranking out 400 million tons every single year. At this rate, we could be looking at over 1.3 billion tons a year by 2060. The scale is just staggering. So where is it all coming from? Well, it's a global operation for sure, but the real powerhouse is East Asia, and China specifically. They're responsible for almost half of the world's entire plastic output. All right, and this is where our story takes a really dark turn, because the very thing that made plastic this miracle material, the fact that it's so incredibly durable, has become its tragic flaw. You see, plastic was designed to last. It doesn't really break down, it doesn't rot away. And that's fantastic if you're making a medical device or a car bumper. But it's an absolute catastrophe when that same material becomes trash, because it just sits there in the environment for hundreds, maybe even thousands of years. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. What about recycling? Well, the reality here is kind of harsh. Of all the plastic we've ever made, less than 10% has ever been recycled. Less than 10. The vast majority, about 76%, just gets thrown out, ending up in landfills or polluting our oceans, rivers, and land. And when that plastic junk finally does start to break down, it doesn't disappear. Nope, it just shatters into smaller and smaller pieces, which we now call microplastics. And these things come from everything. Water bottles breaking apart, tiny fibers that shed from our clothes in the wash, even those little beads in some face scrubs. This pollution is now everywhere. It's in our oceans, our soil, and yep, it's inside us. Study after study has found microplastics in our food, in our drinking water. They've even been found in the human body. So the problem is no longer just out there, it's in here. Okay, I know that is a really bleak picture, but it's not the end of the story, not by a long shot. All around the world, scientists, policymakers, and innovators are working on a path forward, a way to redeem this material. One of the biggest ideas is this concept of a circular economy. So instead of our current system, take, make, waste, the goal is to create a loop, a system where we eliminate waste completely, where plastic never becomes trash, but instead gets reused, repaired, and recycled over and over again. And on the science front, something is happening that sounds like it's straight out of a sci-fi movie. Researchers have actually discovered bacteria that have evolved to eat plastic. This little guy, Ideonella sakayensis, was found outside a bottle recycling plant in Japan.
It works in two steps. First, it uses an enzyme that acts like a tiny pair of scissors, chopping up PET plastic. Then, a second enzyme breaks those bits all the way back down into their original safe chemical building blocks. And the coolest part? We can then use those building blocks to make brand new, high-quality plastic. It's like nature created its own perfect recycling factory.
And these incredible scientific discoveries are happening at the same time as real political action. At the highest levels, organizations like the UN and the OECD are getting everyone together for a global response, because they know this is a crisis that no single country can solve alone.
The main event of all this is a global treaty to end plastic pollution. We're talking 175 nations have agreed to create a legally binding plan. This is actually the biggest Green Deal since the Paris Climate Accord. It's designed to tackle the entire life of plastic, from start to finish, and the goal is to have a draft ready by the end of 2024. So it all comes full circle, doesn't it? We're left with this incredible dilemma. A material born to preserve the natural world, whose greatest strength, its permanence, became its greatest weakness. The question we have to ask now is, can the same human ingenuity that created this mess be the very thing that gets us out of it?